Well, another very warm welcome back, all my vintage dirt bike loving YouTubers, and I do hope I find you all fit and well and in very good health despite these very testing times that we are still currently living under. Now, just as we head into week 7 of lockdown here in the UK, I hope I'm at least giving you something to look at in terms of old vintage race bikes and off-road classics. So in this next featured video I've put together a short compilation of machines that I'm sure you'll enjoy, so stick around for the next 20 minutes or so as we check out more of those German-made Mega Maicos. So our first Maico for part 2 is Mike Robertson's 1985 GME 250 Maico. Now, Mike actually bought this bike as a non-runner from a German eBay site. Now, this is not a fully original bike from 1985 due to some pattern parts and other different motorcycle items that have been fitted to the bike. Now, when Mike bought the bike, it was more or less complete, although the cylinder barrel was cracked, possibly due to the coolant being left in the motor as the bike was lying outside during the harsh winter period. Now, sometime later the barrel was then repaired and then replated, and the complete motor was given a full strip down and rebuild. Now, at the time the bike also required a complete rewiring, although the original SEM ignition was still reused. Now, the original Maico plastics were absolutely rock hard and faded, so Mike never used these old parts but fitted a set of second-hand plastics from a Yamaha. But at the time, Mike really just bought this bike and repaired it on a very small budget just to give himself something to ride and have a bit of fun on at the weekend. And so far, this little Maico racer that Mike has built has fulfilled that requirement to the letter. Now, Mike continues to use this bike at various classic scrambles and other Vinduro events whenever he can, but the bike never really cost Mike a lot of money to get it up and running. But despite the bike's looks and some of the non-original parts on the machine, it's still a great little budget race bike. And this just goes to prove what you can actually produce on a budget to give you a nice little weekend race machine. So that's Mike Robertson's 1985 GME 250. Okay, our next featured Maico, or Maico if you're watching in the United States, is Scottish rider Davey Robb's 250 twin shocker. Now, I'm not entirely sure here, but I think that this is a 1981 frame with possibly the later 82 or 83 Maico engine in it, as this was quite a common swap for the older 81 lump with that dreaded primary chains that were often troublesome on the older 81 power plants. But despite that, this is still a very nice looking machine with those Öhlins rear shocks and that alloy replacement swing arm. Now, these more modern 250 reed valve motors did away with the primary chains, and the clutch and crank were now connected by a drive gear, which was much more reliable and required virtually no maintenance other than regular oil changes. Now, these side panels certainly look like they're from an 81 bike, but again, don't quote me on that particular statement because I never claim to know everything about Maicos. But these particular 250s make an excellent club racer's bike, depending of course on the track layout. Now, if the track is tight and twisty, then this is the bike to have, although mind you, if the track has long straights, then maybe you'd be better off with this bike's bigger brother, the 490 Mega 2. Although it looks like Davey has been out with the polishing cloth here, as these are possibly the shiniest fork legs I've ever seen on a Maico in a while. Now, a very nice alloy brake pedal and ignition cover supplied by Maico only. But without doubt, these 250 reed valve motors are good little engines if you just get them set up right with regards to the ignition and fuel mixture settings are concerned. But nevertheless, another cracking example of one of these German race bikes. That's Davey Rob's very nice looking 81 250. Now, our next bike is a machine that I spotted at a classic scramble event a few years back, and it's a nice example of what I'm sure is either a 440 or 400 1979 Magnum bike. Now, I know that many of you Maico fanatics go on about the big 490 Mega 2 being the number one machine in terms of Maico twin shockers, but these 1979 bikes were every bit as good, and there were many top riders who had good results and championship finishes on these bikes, and most riders tend to stay with these 79 Magnums most of their racing careers. Now, personally speaking myself, I had a 440 version of this piston port motor back in the day, and it was a great engine. It was not as fiery as its big 490 brother, of course, but the power delivery was smooth and there was plenty of it. But these 79 models were very popular back in the day, and currently these days these are very hard bikes to come by. Now, this bike of course has had a replacement alloy DEP replacement silencer fitted. Now, Maico fans also say that if it's not got a metal tank then it's not a Maico, but this rounded shaped tank with the painted on Maico logo makes these 79 models certainly stand out from other bikes in the Maico fleet. But this is a fine example of one of these 79 bikes, and for me personally, every bit as good looking as the big 81 490 Mega 2. Now, next up, it's the turn of another machine from the Steve Parkins classic dirt bike collection, and this is Steve's 1981 MC 490 Beauty. Now, if you were a regular visitor to my channel, you'll more than likely have seen a few other bikes from Steve's collection featured on my channel. Now, just about every other machine I have featured from Steve's collection has been of the very highest quality. But these big 490 Maicos are for your serious twin shock racer. These are not the kind of bikes to buy if you want to just toddle around the racetrack of a weekend. These big 490 power plants just hate running at lower revs, because when they are used in that manner, 9 times out of 10 they will just gas up and stop. Now, these engines have to be ridden hard and kept in the top half of the rev range to keep them running clean and in their sweet spot where they can deliver their best percentage of power. Now, you can see that our particular 490 motor is a piston port engine, although other versions have reed valve inlets fitted. Now, on the business end of Steve's bike, you can see that he has a pattern billet alloy backplate on the rear hub, which of course is supplied by Maico only in the UK. Now these alloy swing arms are also a common replacement for the original steel items that were fitted to these bikes in 1981, and Steve has gone for a nice pair of Öhlins piggyback suspension units as well on his machine. Now Steve's also fitted a brand new set of Talon wheels and heavy duty spokes on his bike, not unusual of course, and it's another common replacement feature on a Maico. And when you consider that these bikes are now heading for 40 years old, it's not surprising that parts are now being changed. But this bike is another cracking example from the Steve Parkins off-road dirt bike collection, and once again another very high quality off-road racer. Now these video clips were captured a few years ago at the Nostalgia Scramble, which was held at Home Farm in Sedberg in Cumbria each year, although sadly there's not been a race event held there since 2017. But mind you, when it was in full swing, it was a mega event for pre-65, pre-68 and twin shock racing bikes, so who knows, hopefully one day those days will return. So that's Steve Parkins 81 490. Now next up is a bike that certainly could not be described as a concourse winner or garage queen. This is Tom Noble's GM 500 race bike. Now I'm just guessing here again, but I think this could be a 1986 GM 500, although I could be wrong in that assumption, so please don't take it as gospel that this is a hard and fast fact. Now unmistakably this bike is a right old Maico warhorse, and it's had its fair share of battles on the track and is simply covered in battle scars and other evidence of hasty running repairs just to keep it out on the racetrack. Now as I remember, these were some of the early water-cooled Maicos. Now I'm not fully versed on how good these GM 500s were actually on the track, although I do know that Maico were in a very sorry state of affairs by this time, and it wouldn't be long before someone was going to pull the plug on their entire operation. But Tom's bike could never be labelled as a part-time racer, as Tom would be the first person to admit to his bike being used regularly, and judging by all the welding repairs to the frame and many of the other alloy fixings, this machine has kept Tom very busy in the workshop between race events. Now again, these motors had a reed valve induction system and your standard Motoplat ignition system. Now these bikes also had the alloy rear box section swing arm, which used a hydraulic disc brake at the rear. Now the stopping power of this brake was not the greatest, but for a motocross machine from 1986 it was better than the previous drum brake system. Now a single shock rear suspension on these GMs of course has gone were the old twin shocks of the older Maicos. But by 1986 it was debatable if this was actually an improvement over the older twin shock suspension systems of the earlier years. Now a good set of handguards on Tom's bike to help stop his knuckles getting battered by stones and other debris. Now here you can catch a glimpse of the underside of the suspension linkage system, which was soon to become the normal on just about all motocross machines in the future. But as you can see, Tom's not one for cleaning and polishing his old GM to make it look nice and shiny when it turns up at a motocross race event. Although he does spend a lot of time with the spanners and the welder just trying to keep it all together to compete for the next race day. But there's certainly not a lot of these old GM 500s left, and it's great to see that Tom is keeping his still racing, even although it may be turning into a full-time occupation. And so finally, to conclude this part 2 video on our Mega Maico's series of videos, we're going to look at John Stokes' 81 490. Now, John is a self-confessed Maico maniac and loves these old German bikes and has a very good assortment of these machines in his collection. Now, he does race other old twin shockers and often takes out his CR 480 Honda for the occasional spin, but John's first love is always for his Maicos. Now, I know firsthand that John is well versed in the maintenance and operation of these 490 motors, and John's always a good source of information if you need any advice or pointers on how to set them up. Now, this particular bike's not a fully original machine from 1981 because not many of them actually are these days, as there's an abundance of replacement parts that you can purchase for these bikes, and that's mainly the reason that you very seldom see two of these 490 bikes that look exactly the same when you attend a twin shock race meeting. Now, once again, a new replacement alloy swing arm for the factory fitted original steel item. And John always uses quality parts on his bikes, and a decent pair of Öhlins piggyback shocks are used as his rear suspension. Now, plastic fuel tank again on these 81 Maicos, but this awesome 490 two-stroke motor is the star of these 81 bikes because the power these engines can produce was just mind-boggling for the 1980s. Now, another pattern part on John's machine was this nice yellow and black seat cover supplied by Race Base UK. Now, other protection that was fitted was a pair of handguards, again to protect John's precious knuckles from flying stones and other debris. Now, although John's bike is not a fully original 1981 machine, it still has that menacing Maico look, and what's more, when it gets fired up, it sounds even better. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this latest selection of Mega Maicos. Now, there will be a follow-up video in part 3, so please make sure that you look out for that. But until next time, stay safe and well, and hopefully it won't be too long before we can all get the use of our old classic dirt bikes once more. This video was brought to you in association with WorldSport, the world's #1 supplier for all your off-road and leisure sportswear. Just visit their online website for more information.